What if the same trait that's been holding you back in business is also the exact same thing that makes you dangerous? The only difference is whether you know how to use it or not. I'm Jack Taylor and I've been building businesses online and offline for 10 years. And just 2 years ago, I was told that I have an ADHD brain. Now I partner with other entrepreneurs who have the same wiring, helping them to scale their business around their unique brain type. So the reason I'm making this video is because I think that the way most people talk about ADHD is doing more harm than good. I've come to recognize that there are two camps in the ADHD conversation right now. Camp 1 says ADHD is a superpower. There are no downsides and you should be just celebrating it. Whereas Camp 2 says that ADHD is a disorder, viewed similar to the likes of dementia as a mental disorder that needs to be managed. We've suggested strategies that you can use to help you cope with it and white knuckle your way through your day. And I think they're both wrong. Not because there isn't truth in either of them, there is, but because I think they're both incomplete. And when you build your life around an incomplete picture, you just end up confused about why things still aren't working. The superpower crowd will have you believe that your ADHD brain is this magical thing that makes you creative, spontaneous, and full of energy all of the time, which sounds great until you're 3 months behind on your accounts. You started 4 projects and finished none of them, and you're staring at your to-do list at 11 p.m, wondering why you can't just do the basics. Oh, and don't let me forget the pile of parking tickets and tax bills that you haven't paid yet. I'm sure you'll agree that it doesn't feel very super in that moment, does it? And the disorder crowd will have you believe that you're fundamentally broken and need to be managed, that your brain is deficient and incapable of building an extraordinary life. For them, the goal is to minimize the damage and try to function like everyone else, or at least pretend like you are, which sounds reasonable, especially because the people spouting this have the word doctor next to their name, until you start to realize that that framing has had you in a shame spiral for years. Because every time you fail at being normal, it confirms the story that something is fundamentally wrong with you. Well, neither of these camps give you the full picture, and neither of them gives you anything useful to actually build with. So I'm going to give you what I think is a more honest lens. One based on 10 years of running businesses with this brain type, coaching other entrepreneurs with this brain type, and studying the neuroscience and evolutionary psychology behind why we think, feel, and behave the way we do. And that lens is this: the ADHD brain is a duality. For every trait that feels like a strength, there is a corresponding weakness. And for every trait that feels like a weakness, there is also a corresponding strength. They are the same trait, just expressed differently in different contexts. And once you understand that, you can finally start building around it. Let me show you what I mean. Take one of the traits that likely all ADHD entrepreneurs suffer with: being scattered. I have been at various points in my life simultaneously running an online coaching company, in talks with manufacturers in China to start mobile doll washing business, managing property investments, launching a podcast, and in discussions with at least 2 different people about joint ventures, all at the same time. That is the scattered side, chasing 5 rabbits and catching none. But a flip side of the scattered trait is being multi-interested. And multi-interested is the reason that this business exists. Because my brain wouldn't let me stay in one lane, I spent years pulling from neuroscience, psychology, evolutionary biology, NLP, philosophy, systems thinking, business strategy, health and fitness. And I ended up with a service that blends all of those things in a way that I believe nobody else does. And my clients will tell you the experience that they get is completely unique. And it's unique because my brain refused to be one-dimensional. That is the same trait at play. Scattered when it had no direction, but multi-interested when it did. Now drop a comment below once you've listened to this. Let me know which of the traits that I cover today are the most prevalent for you in your business and life right now, because I'm sure there's going to be some. Right, let's move on to the next ADHD trait: impulsivity. On more than one occasion, I've walked past tattoo shops on holiday and just gone in and got one on the spot. To be honest, at least half of my tattoos can be attributed to this. I also lost 20 grand on an investment a few years ago because I was so mentally aroused by the upside that I didn't properly consider the downside. I didn't do my due diligence and I just acted on impulse. And it is safe to say that I have not done that again. But that is the very real cost of impulsivity when it is undirected. But the flip side of impulsivity is speed of action. And speed of action is how I went from having the idea for this business to signing my first client in just 3 weeks, and 5 clients within the first 6 weeks. And just 2 weeks ago, I had the idea of building software for my clients, and by the end of this week, it will be live and rolled out to them as a beta test. So when what I call a hunter brain commits to a direction, it has the ability to move faster than almost anyone. The gap between making the decision and then the action can be tiny. And in business, that speed will act as your competitive advantage if you know how to actually use it. Now, here's where this gets neurologically interesting, and it's worth understanding why this duality exists rather than just accepting it because I said so. So if you're watching this, your brain likely has a different dopamine regulation system to most people's. You'll have a lower baseline dopamine level, which means you need more stimulation to feel engaged, meaning that when something genuinely interests you, when it creates that dopamine hit, your brain locks in, and I mean properly locks in. Now, this isn't a conscious choice that you will make. It is a neurological state. And when something doesn't interest you, your brain essentially refuses to engage with it at all, regardless of how much is riding on it. The dopamine isn't there. So the engagement isn't there either. That's why you can spend 13 hours building something you're excited about and then not be able to send just 10 emails the next day. That isn't your brain malfunctioning. It is doing exactly what it's designed to do. It just happens to be designed for a world that unfortunately no longer exists. A world where that intense, all-in, novelty-driven focus kept you alive. Which brings me to the emotional side. For the majority of my teenage years and early adult life, I used to feel like I was living on a pendulum. It was very rare that I'd be sat emotionally in the middle, feeling balanced. I'd either be at the highest of highs, feeling it viscerally, overwhelmed with this sense of possibility and energy, or I'd be beating myself profusely with a stick, feeling behind, feeling like I wasn't doing enough, feeling like everyone else was managing to do this and I couldn't. And these two states could switch, sometimes within the same day. Now that's the cost side, the emotional pendulum, the highs and lows that feel completely disproportionate to what's actually happening in reality. But the other side of that emotional intensity is empathy. I have the ability to tell within 5 seconds of getting on a Zoom call with one of my clients how their week has gone before they have even said a word. And as time's gone on, I've come to realize that I'm highly attuned to energy, to body language, to what people actually mean beyond what they say. And to be honest, that's not a skill that I've learned consciously. It is a byproduct of the same emotional wiring that puts me on that pendulum. And my clients will tell you that one of the most valuable things about working with me is that I actually get it. And we're not talking intellectually, like I've read loads of books, but I actually feel it in my fucking bones. And that connection is what makes the coaching relationship work so well. It's why I can push and challenge people hard without losing them, because they know I understand what they're going through. It's the same wiring. You've got the pendulum on one side and the deep human connection on the other. So now you can hopefully see the pattern. Every trait has two sides. And the brain isn't inherently one or the other. It is both, which is why the superpower narrative and the disorder narrative both miss the point, because the brain isn't good or bad. It just is. Now I like to think about it like shoe size. If I've got size 10 feet, then I've got size 10 feet. That's objectively just the case, whether I like it or not. I wouldn't then put on a pair of size 8 shoes, look down at my feet and think there's something wrong with my feet because they hurt and it's uncomfortable. There's nothing wrong with my feet. The shoes just don't fit. And that's what's been happening to most of you for your entire lives. You've been in systems like schools, offices, business frameworks, productivity methods that were built for a completely different brain type. And every time those systems didn't work, you ended up blaming yourself. You thought the problem was you, but it was never you. It was always the fit. For example, I have a client, Ewan, who came to me about 9 months ago. He is a solo operator running an agency, and he was fluctuating between 3 to 5 grand a month. Prior to us working together, he'd done therapy, he'd read books, he'd listened to the podcasts, and he basically resigned himself to the idea that getting to where he wanted to go to was just going to be so much harder for him than it would be for anyone else. And I remember him telling me that he felt like he was 3 years behind where he actually was in business. And that was down to his personal execution problems. Now that's what happens when you spent years in the wrong size shoes. You start to internalize it. You start thinking that the problem is your feet. Now what we did wasn't complicated. We didn't try to fix his brain. We didn't try to make him more disciplined or more focused or more consistent. Instead, we built systems that actually fit how his brain naturally works. We gave him permission to follow his curiosities instead of fighting them all the time. We repositioned him in his business so he was in creation mode for 80% of his week, doing the work that his brain was actually wired for. Fast forward to now, he's still running his agency, but he's now in a completely different sector that plays to his strengths. He's meeting with high net worth individuals from some of the leading companies in his space on a weekly basis now. And we're projected to hit a 50 grand month in the next few weeks, still as a solo operator. That's the same brain that is now within different systems, which are now producing a completely different outcome for him. So having this brain time isn't necessarily something that we need to celebrate, but it's definitely not something that we should be thinking about as a disorder that needs to be managed. I believe instead it's something that we need to understand deeply and honestly so that we can build around it. Because the truth of the matter is, the traits don't change. The pendulum doesn't magically go away. The impulsivity of getting tattoos in Ibiza won't disappear. And the scattered thinking doesn't just suddenly stop. But when you stop trying to shrink yourself into systems that weren't built for you, and you start designing your life and your business around how your brain actually operates, those same traits that felt like a curse start working in your favor. Now, I'll put a link to Ewan's full story in the description if you want to see the detail around what that transformation actually looked like for him. Now, I mentioned that your brain is interest-driven, not importance-driven. And that's one of those things that sounds simple, but actually explains almost every execution problem you've ever had. Why you can spend 14 hours on a landing page, but you can't send 10 DMs. Why you can build an entire course in a weekend, but you can't open your inbox on Monday. Why you work harder than everyone you know and you still feel like you're going nowhere. And I break this down in detail in this video here and what I believe every ADHD entrepreneur should be doing about it. Check it out and I'll see you there.